The lobby floor was freezing, and I could taste the copper of my own blood against the glass of the revolving door. 2 minutes ago, I owned this building. Now, security was pinning my face to the tile because according to every government database in the world, I've been dead for 3 days. My fingerprints didn't unlock my office. They triggered a silent alarm for identity theft. My best friend Julian didn't just take my company. He filed the death certificate. He even hired a look-alike to die in a canyon so there would be a body in the dirt with my DNA. Right now, a probate liquidator is clearing out my home, and the police are 10 minutes away to arrest a tomb robber for trying to live in his own house. If I don't stop the merger by midnight, my entire life vanishes into a Cayman account, and the only version of Marcus Thorne left will be the one in a casket. Let me take you back to where this began. The mahogany table vibrated under Marcus's palms as David slid the manila folder across the polished surface. The air in the boardroom curdled, smelling of stale espresso and the metallic tang of the ventilation system. David didn't gloat. He simply adjusted his spectacles, the fluorescent lights dancing in the lenses. "Open the file, Marcus," David murmured, his voice a dry rasp like sandpaper on wood. Marcus flipped the cover. A certificate of death stared upward, stamped with the violet seal of the state of New York. His own name occupied the primary line. Beneath it, the date of passing matched the afternoon of his hiking accident 3 years prior. A trip where he had slipped on a jagged ridge in the Rockies, bruising his ribs but walking away alive. Or so he had thought. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur, the senior partner, cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding in a jar. He withdrew his hand from the merger agreement, the gold nib of his fountain pen hovering inches above the signature line. "This is a clerical error," Marcus said. His tongue felt like a piece of dry leather. He reached into his pocket, his fingers finding the smooth, cool surface of his lucky stone. He began to rotate it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times clockwise. The weight of the failure he had carried since 24 felt suddenly, impossibly heavy. "The documents are authenticated," David replied, leaning into the high-backed leather chair. He picked up his heavy gold coin, the rhythmic clink catch echoing through the sterile room. "You ceased to exist 36 months ago. Dead men possess no voting rights. They certainly don't command $50 million conglomerates." Around the table, the board members shifted. The soft rustle of expensive wool suits filled the room. Marcus reached for his glass, but his fingers trembled, sending a ripple across the water's surface. He caught his reflection in the window, a ghost in a pinstripe suit, fading against the gray Manhattan skyline. The merger, his legacy, evaporated into the sterile air. He reached for the phone to call legal, but the line remained cold. The system had already purged him. "I am standing right here, David," Marcus snapped, his voice tight. "Look at me. I am breathing. I am talking." "The law doesn't care about breath, Marcus," David said, flipping the coin again. Clink catch. "It cares about records, and the records say you are a memory." The door to the boardroom swung open with a heavy thud. Steve Miller, the head of security, stood there like a wall of granite. His neck was wider than his head, his arms crossed over a chest that looked reinforced by steel. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked through him. "Mr. Miller," Marcus said, trying to reclaim the authority that usually dripped from his every word. "Tell these gentlemen that you saw me walk in this morning. Tell them I signed in at the desk." Steve didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stepped aside to make room for Julian Vance. Julian entered with a predatory grace, his smile bright and hollow. He wore a suit that cost more than most people made in a year, and he walked straight to the head of the table, Marcus's seat. "It's a tragedy, truly," Julian said, his voice melodic, lingering on the vowels. "The loss of such a brilliant mind. We've been mourning you for years, Marcus. To have an imposter stand here, wearing your face, using your name, it's an insult to your legacy." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. "Julian, what is this? We grew up together. I gave you your start." Julian didn't look at him. He pulled a pair of silver tweezers from his pocket and began to meticulously pick a red garnish off a nearby catering tray. His face contorted with a brief flash of disgust at the sight of the small red pepper. "Security," Julian whispered. "Please remove this person from the premises. He's trespassing on private property." Marcus lunged for the keyboard on the table, his fingers flying toward the keys. He needed to show them. If he could just get into the internal system, he could pull up his biometric history, his encrypted logs, anything to prove the pulse in his wrist was real. The screen stayed black. "Access denied," a mechanical voice chirped from the speakers. "I built this system," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "I wrote the core logic. The logic has been updated," David said, catching his coin one last time. "And you are no longer a variable in the equation." Steve Miller moved then. He didn't rush, he simply closed the distance. His hand, large enough to palm a basketball, gripped Marcus's shoulder. The pressure was immense, a physical reminder that Marcus was no longer the man in charge. "Let's go, sir," Steve said. As he turned Marcus toward the door, Marcus heard the big man whisper a soft "sorry" to the mahogany table they bumped against. They dragged him through the executive suite. Marcus's heels skidded across the marble, the sound echoing like a dying animal. He saw his employees, people he had hired, people whose kids' names he didn't know, looking down at their desks. They wouldn't meet his eyes. To them, he was already a ghost. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and paranoia. The turnstiles chirped with every badge swipe, a rhythmic digital execution. As they reached the revolving doors, Marcus struggled, trying to grab the frame. "You can't do this," Marcus yelled. "I own this building." "Not anymore," Steve said. He shoved Marcus forward. Two other guards joined in, their hands like iron clamps on Marcus's arms. They pinned him against the cold glass of the revolving door. The city outside blurred by a sudden, torrential downpour. With one final heave, they threw him out. Marcus hit the wet pavement hard. The smell of damp asphalt and exhaust filled his senses. He looked up just in time to see the heavy glass doors lock with a definitive electronic click. Behind the glass, Steve Miller stood perfectly still, his face a mask of duty. He leaned down and adjusted a floor mat that had been ruffled in the scuffle, whispering an apology to the rug. Marcus sat in the rain, his $5,000 suit soaking up the filth of the New York gutter. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, but the screen flashed a single message. "Account suspended. Contact administrator." He was a master of connection who had just been unplugged. He stood up, his knees shaking. His hand went to his pocket, rotating the stone. 5 times. He had to think. He had to find a way back in. His eyes scanned the sidewalk, landing on a green plastic trash bin near the service entrance. Something caught the light, a flash of white plastic. He lunged for it, digging through wet newspapers and discarded coffee cups. His fingers closed around a clip. It was a visitor badge, The guest lettering faded, but the magnetic strip intact. It was a low-level key, a bottom-tier pass for delivery drivers and janitors. To the Marcus Thorne of an hour ago, it was garbage. To the Marcus Thorne of now, it was a lifeline. He moved toward the service entrance, staying in the shadows of the concrete pillars. He swiped the badge. The reader groaned, a mechanical click signaling a small, pathetic victory. The heavy steel door hummed and opened an inch. He slipped inside, the air smelling of industrial cleaner and stale grease. He didn't go for the main elevators. Those would be watched. Instead, he headed for the service stairwell, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached the third-floor landing and checked his watch. He had a meeting, not with the board, but with the only person who might still see him as a man instead of a ghost. Subverted beat 1.4. Marcus pushed through the heavy fire door leading to the loading dock. The air here was thick with the smell of diesel and wet cardboard. Standing by a stack of wooden pallets was Sarah Johnson. She looked smaller than he remembered, her thick-rimmed glasses fogged by the humidity. She was clutching a leather notebook to her chest as if it were a shield. "Sarah," Marcus breathed, stepping into the dim light. "Thank God, you're still here." Sarah jumped, her eyes wide behind the lenses. "Marcus, I heard. The whole building is talking. They said you were an imposter." "It's a play, Sarah. A corporate hit," Marcus said, his voice regaining some of its clinical edge. "Julian and David, they've falsified the records. I need your help. You were the best legal clerk I had. You know where the bodies are buried in the filing system. If we can get to the backup drives in the basement, we can prove the death certificate is a forgery." He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder. "I know I fired you. I know I was difficult. But I need you. You're the only one who knows the architecture of the merger better than I do. Help me, and I'll make it right. 5 times the severance. A partner track at the new firm. Anything." Sarah looked at him, her lip trembling. She opened her notebook and scribbled something. An apology for being late, no doubt. Then she looked up and gave him a small, watery smile. "I already started looking, Marcus. I couldn't believe it when I saw the filing. I have the car waiting. We can go to the off-site storage. I have a key." Relief washed over Marcus, so potent it made his head swim. His shoulders dropped for the first time in hours. He wasn't alone. He had a brilliant legal mind and a loyal ally. The logic held. He had optimized his chances by finding the one person with a grievance and a brain. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice softening. "Let's go. My car is in the VIP lot." They walked toward the edge of the loading dock. In the distance, a yellow tow truck was backing into the VIP space. Marcus's sleek, black Italian sports car was already hooked to the winch. "Wait," Marcus said, frowning. "That's my car." "They're taking it already?" "Probate moves fast when there's no air," Sarah said quietly. Her voice had changed. The tremor was gone. Marcus watched the tow truck driver hop out. It was Michael Davis, a man Marcus recognized from the liquidation firm Julian used for dirty acquisitions. Michael wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing a shiny, cheap suit and neon green socks that glowed in the gray light. "Hey," Marcus shouted. "That's my vehicle." Michael didn't look up. He just hitched his trousers and spat on the pavement. "Estate asset, pal. Perusing the legalities, this belongs to the Vance Group now." Marcus turned to Sarah, his brow furrowed. "Sarah, call the police. Tell them the car is being stolen." Sarah didn't pull out her phone. She pulled out a different leather notebook, not her apology log, but a blue one with the Thorne Vance logo on the cover. "I did call someone, Marcus," she said. A black SUV pulled up behind the tow truck. The window rolled down, revealing Julian Vance. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked bored. "You really should have left when you had the chance, Marcus," Julian said. "Sarah, did he give you the location of the emergency drives?" Sarah stepped away from Marcus, moving toward the SUV. She didn't look back. "He said they're in the basement, Mr. Vance. But he doesn't have the codes. He was going to use me to bypass the gate." The world tilted. Marcus felt the cold rain soaking through his shirt, but the chill inside was worse. "Sarah, you're working for him?" "He didn't just fire me, Marcus," Sarah said, her voice flat. "You did. You told me I was suboptimal during the 2021 audit. You told me I was a variable with no ROI. Julian found me 3 months ago. He gave me a job. He gave me a reason to stay until 3 in the morning. Julian leaned out the window, the scent of expensive cologne clashing with the smell of the loading dock. "She's been the one filing the paperwork, Marcus. Every clerical error, every missing file, that was Sarah. She's been erasing you line by line for 90 days. "I trusted you," Marcus whispered. "That was your first mistake," Julian said. "You treated people like code, but code can be rewritten, and Sarah is an excellent programmer." Julian nodded to Michael, the tow truck driver. "Take the car. And Sarah, get in. We have a gala to prepare for." The SUV sped away, splashing Marcus with oily puddle water. He stood alone on the loading dock, the visitor badge clutched in his hand. He hadn't found an ally. He had walked straight into the arms of the person who had been sharpening the knife for months. He was worse than dead. He was irrelevant. The walk to his penthouse took 40 minutes. By the time Marcus reached the iron gates of his Upper East Side brownstone, the rain had slowed to a miserable mist. He expected to see the familiar warm glow of the foyer lights. Instead, he saw a neon orange sign staked into the manicured lawn. "Property of the state. Subject to probate liquidation." He lunged for the front door, pulling his keys from his pocket. He jammed the brass key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. It felt like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. He tried again, twisting so hard the metal bit into his palm. Nothing. Come on," he hissed. He looked through the side window. The interior was stripped. The Persian rugs, the original Monets, the custom-built mahogany bookshelves, all gone. In their place were white stickers with barcodes, stuck to the floor where the furniture used to be. "Buster," he called out, his voice cracking. "Buster!" There was no bark, no rhythmic thud of a golden retriever's tail against the floorboards. The house was a tomb. On the welcome mat sat a single white flower, a funeral lily. Its scent was cloying, the smell of a wake. "Mr. Thorne?" Marcus spun around. Standing on the sidewalk was Officer Robert Higgins. The policeman looked tired, his eyes heavy with the weight of 20 years of city grime. He was counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3, as his eyes scanned the windows of the house. "Officer," Marcus said, rushing toward him. "Thank God. Someone has broken into my home. They've changed the locks. They've taken my dog." Higgins stopped counting at 12 and looked at Marcus. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a man in a ruined suit with wild eyes and mud on his face. "I'm going to need you to step back from the gate, sir," Higgins said, his hand resting on his belt. "I live here. I'm Marcus Thorne." Higgins pulled a clipboard from his belt. Marcus Thorne died 3 years ago, buddy. I've got the probate order right here. This property is being cleared for auction. Now, I've had 3 calls today about an imposter wandering around Midtown. I'm guessing that's you. I am not an imposter. Look at my face. Use your eyes. I am using them, Higgins said, his voice flat. I see a vagrant trespassing on a sealed estate. You want to spend the night in a cell, or you want to keep walking? Check my prints, Marcus pleaded. Take me to the station and run my biometrics. Higgins sighed, a sound like a leaking tire. The system already ran him, pal. When you tried to get into your office, the flag came back deceased. If the computer says you're dead, you're dead. I don't make the rules, I just count the tiles. Now move. Marcus looked at the house one last time. He saw a shadow in the upstairs window, a man in a suit, holding a silver pair of tweezers. Julian. He was already in the bedroom. He was already wearing Marcus's life. Marcus turned and ran. He didn't stop until he reached the 24-hour gym 3 blocks away. It was the only place left where he might have a chance. He had an emergency cash box hidden behind the ventilation grate in his private locker. $10,000 in hundreds. It was enough to disappear, enough to buy a new identity. The gym was nearly empty, the air smelling of sweat and rubber. The rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a distant treadmill echoed through the locker room. Marcus hurried to locker 402. He reached into the back, his fingers fumbling for the metal lip of the grate. Looking for this? Marcus froze. 2 men stepped out from the shower stalls. They weren't wearing gym clothes. They wore cheap leather jackets and had the heavy, bruised knuckles of professional debt collectors. One of them held the small metal cash box. Julian said you'd come here, the larger one said. Said you were predictable, like a line of code. That's my money, Marcus said, his voice trembling. It's an estate asset, the man replied, and we're here to recover it, with interest. The man lunged. Marcus dodged, his foot slipping on the wet tile. He grabbed a heavy 45-pound weight plate from a nearby rack. It was cold, the iron biting into his skin. As the man swung a heavy fist, Marcus brought the plate up. The sound of iron hitting bone was sickening, a dull thwack. The man let out a choked cry and stumbled back, clutching his shattered hand. The second man pulled a collapsible baton. You're making this difficult, ghost. Marcus didn't wait. He threw the weight plate at the second man's feet, causing him to jump back, and bolted toward the back of the locker room. He saw the silver handle of the laundry chute. It was a narrow, dark throat of galvanized steel, designed for towels, not people. He dived in. The descent was a blur of darkness and the stench of sour sweat. The metal sides scraped his shoulders, pinning him momentarily before gravity took over. He slid down 3 floors, the friction burning through his shirt. He hit the pile of damp, dirty towels at the bottom with a bone-jarring thud. He scrambled out of the bin, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was in the basement laundry room. The air was thick with the smell of industrial detergent. He pushed open the heavy exit door and stumbled into the alleyway. A car was idling there, a beat-up sedan with a cracked windshield. The passenger door opened. Sarah Johnson sat in the driver's seat. "Get in," she said. Marcus hesitated. "You betrayed me. You're working for Julian." "I was," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "Until I saw what he did to your dog." "He didn't just take Buster, Marcus. He dropped him at a kill shelter in Jersey. I went and got him. He's in the back." Marcus looked. In the back seat, a golden retriever let out a soft, mournful whimper. "Why help me now?" Marcus asked, sliding into the seat. "Because Julian doesn't apologize," Sarah said, tapping her notebook. And because I found something in the files he doesn't know I have. The hiking accident? It wasn't an accident. And it wasn't you. She shifted the car into gear and floored it. He hired a look-alike, Marcus. A terminal patient from a clinic in Queens. He paid the guy's family $1 million to have him die in your clothes, with your ID in his pocket. And he found a coroner who was willing to look the other way. Dr. Alan Smith, Marcus whispered. Exactly, Sarah said. And if we want your life back, we have to make the doctor talk before the gala starts tonight. The clinic was a squat, white-tiled building in a part of Queens where the streetlights were all broken. The air inside smelled of bleach, a scent so sharp it made Marcus's eyes water. Dr. Smith has a gambling problem, Sarah whispered as they crept down the darkened hallway. Julian paid off his markers at an underground casino. That's how he bought the signature on the death certificate. They reached the records room. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard of the doctor's private terminal. He didn't need a password. He knew the vulnerabilities of the software. He had designed the encryption protocols for the medical board 5 years ago. I'm in, Marcus whispered, scanning for the Thorne file. The screen flickered. A video file appeared. It was a recording from the morgue, a grainy, blue-tinted feed. It showed Julian Vance standing over a body. The body had Marcus's jawline, Marcus's hair, but the eyes were wrong. Even in death, they lacked the cold, calculating spark. That's it, Sarah breathed. That's the proof. Not yet, a voice boomed from the doorway. Julian Vance stood there, flanked by Steve Miller and 2 armed guards. Julian was holding a silver tray. On it sat a single gleaming syringe filled with a clear, viscous liquid. You really are persistent, Marcus, Julian said, his voice echoing in the sterile room. But you're forgetting the fundamental rule of the system. Once a file is deleted, any attempt to recover it is just noise. Steve Miller stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the only exit. He looked at the floor and whispered, "Sorry," to a rolling stool he bumped aside. I have the video, Julian, Marcus said, holding up a thumb drive. It's over. Is it? Julian smiled, a cold, predatory expression. Steve, hold him down. It's time for the imposter to succumb to the guilt of his crimes. A tragic suicide. The toxicology report will show a massive overdose of sedatives. Very clean. Very logical. Steve gripped Marcus's arms, the pressure enough to make the bones groan. Julian approached, the needle glinting under the fluorescent lights. This won't hurt, Julian lied. Well, perhaps a little. But you always liked data, didn't you? Think of this as a final data entry. Marcus struggled, his heels kicking at the white tiles. He saw a red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall just inches from his hand. He lunged, not for the door, but for the canister. He ripped it from the wall and slammed the base into Steve's knee. The big man grunted and lost his grip. Marcus pulled the pin and squeezed the trigger. A cloud of thick, white chemical powder erupted, filling the room. Julian screamed, dropping the syringe as the powder hit his eyes. The guard stumbled back, blinded and coughing. Marcus didn't run for the door. He knew they'd be waiting there. He ran for the back of the lab, toward the window. He smashed the glass with the fire extinguisher, the sound like a gunshot in the small room. He tumbled out into the cold night air, his lungs burning. He saw Sarah's car idling at the curb. "Go!" he yelled, diving through the open window as she floored it. "Did you get it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I got it," Marcus said, clutching the drive. "Now we just have to get to the gala." Subverted beat 3.6. We're almost there, Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the glowing spire of the Thorne Tower in the distance. Once I plug this into the main server, the video will play on every screen in the ballroom. Julian won't be able to hide. The board, the investors, the press, they'll all see the truth. Sarah nodded, her hands white on the steering wheel. You're doing the right thing, Marcus. You're taking back what's yours. The law has to listen to evidence like this. It's a closed loop. There's no way out for him. Marcus felt a surge of triumph. He had outplayed them. He had used the very systems they tried to turn against him. He looked at the drive in his hand. It was the key to his resurrection. He could already see the headlines. Marcus Thorne, the man who beat death. He felt the weight of the stone in his pocket and realized he didn't need to rotate it anymore. The failure was gone. Turn here, Marcus commanded. The service entrance is just around the corner. As they rounded the bend, the world was suddenly bathed in a strobe of red and blue. 6 police cruisers blocked the road. Behind them stood a line of federal agents in windbreakers, with FBI emblazoned in yellow. At the center of the line stood Julian Vance, looking calm and somber. He was talking to a woman in a sharp suit, Jennifer Martinez, the lead investigator for the Financial Crimes Division. "Stop the car," Marcus yelled. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the tires shrieking against the asphalt. Jennifer Martinez stepped forward, a megaphone in her hand. "Marcus Thorne, or whoever you are, step out of the vehicle with your hands up. You are under arrest for international embezzlement, identity theft, and the murder of the individual found in the Rockies." Marcus froze. Murder? What is she talking about? Julian stepped forward, his voice amplified by the police speakers. "It's over, Marcus. We found the offshore accounts you opened in the dead man's name. We found the wire transfers to the lookalikes' family. You didn't just steal a life. You ended one to cover your tracks." "He's lying," Marcus screamed, leaning out the window. "I have the proof. I have the video of him in the morgue." "We've already seen the video," Jennifer Martinez said, her voice cold. "Mr. Vance provided it to us an hour ago. It shows you wearing a mask of his face, bribing Dr. Smith to falsify a death certificate so you could disappear with $50 million of Aegis funds. The man in the morgue wasn't a lookalike. He was a victim of your restructuring plan." Marcus looked at the drive in his hand. He realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't stolen the truth. He had stolen a trap. Julian hadn't been hiding the video. He had been planting it. The grainy, blue-tinted feed wasn't a confession. It was a deep fake. A digital forgery designed to look like Marcus's own work. "Sarah," Marcus whispered. "You told me about the lookalike. You told me where to find the file." Sarah didn't look at him. She was already opening her door, her hands raised. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered, pulling out her notebook and scribbling a final entry. "But Julian offered me a seat on the board, and you only offered me a severance." Marcus looked around. He was surrounded. The sirens wailed, a wall of sound that drowned out his thoughts. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a ghost. He was a fugitive. He had tried to use the system to save himself, and the system had simply opened its jaws and swallowed him whole. He was no longer just dead. He was a monster. The gala was a sea of gold leaf and champagne. The high-pitched clinking of crystal glasses sounded like 1,000 tiny bells ringing for a funeral. In the center of the room, a giant screen displayed a portrait of Marcus Thorne, draped in black silk. Julian Vance stood on the stage, a glass of sparkling cider in his hand. Nothing red. Never red. Marcus was a titan, Julian told the crowd, his voice thick with rehearsed grief. But even titans can fall. Today, We sign the merger that ensures his vision lives on, even if he cannot. In the back of the room, hidden behind a velvet curtain, the real Marcus Thorne watched. He had escaped the police at the clinic by crawling through a dumpster, the smell of rot and wet cardboard still clinging to his skin. He had used his visitor badge to enter the server room, the blinking blue lights looking like thousands of watching eyes in the dark. He wasn't going to play the video. He knew now that images could be faked. He sat at the main terminal, his fingers moving across the keys with a speed that transcended logic. He didn't look for files. He looked for flow. "Julian," Marcus whispered. Suddenly, the music stopped. The giant screen flickered. The portrait of Marcus disappeared, replaced by a scrolling list of names and numbers. The audience gasped. It wasn't a video. It was a live feed of the Cayman Islands accounts Julian had spent months filling. The numbers were plummeting. "What is this?" Julian shouted, spinning around. Marcus's voice boomed over the speakers, distorted and low. "Ownership is an illusion, Julian. You taught me that, so I'm deleting the illusion." "Stop it!" Julian screamed. "That's my money." "It's the company's money," Marcus said. "And since the company is currently being managed by a dead man, I've decided to donate it. All of it. To the kill shelters in Jersey. To the legal aid clinics Sarah used to work for. To the families of every person you ever restructured." The crowd erupted into chaos. David Miller stood up, his gold coin falling from his hand and rolling across the floor. Clink, clink, clink. It landed on tails. "You can't do this," David yelled. The merger is based on a lie," Marcus said. "And I just sent the real toxicology report, the one I took this morning at a private lab, to every news outlet in the city. It shows I have zero traces of the sedatives your imposter was supposed to have used. I'm alive, Julian, and you're bankrupt." The doors of the ballroom burst open. Jennifer Martinez and a dozen FBI agents swarmed the room. They didn't head for the curtain. They headed for the stage. "Julian Vance, David Miller," Jennifer said, her voice echoing. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of Marcus Thorne." Julian looked at the screen. The balance read $0. He fell to his knees, his face contorting. He looked at a stray cherry tomato that had fallen from a guest's plate onto the stage. He began to gag, the red color triggering the impending doom he had feared since he was 12. Marcus watched from the shadows. He saw the handcuffs click into place. He saw Sarah Johnson being led away, her leather notebook falling to the floor, forgotten. He didn't stay for the applause. He didn't stay to reclaim his office. 2 weeks later, the air in Vermont was cold and clean. The maple trees were a vibrant, burning red. But Marcus didn't look away. The color didn't represent blood anymore. It represented life. He walked along a narrow trail, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves. Behind him, Buster trotted happily, his tail wagging a rhythmic beat against the air. Marcus reached into his pocket. He felt the smooth stone. He pulled it out and looked at it. It was just a piece of gravel. It had no power. It carried no weight. He threw it into the valley below. He reached the small cabin Sarah had mentioned in her final, genuine apology note, the one she had hidden in his pocket before the police arrived. It was modest, built of cedar and stone. There were no servers here, no biometric scanners, no digital footprints. He sat on the porch and breathed in the scent of pine and damp earth. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't check his watch. He didn't tap the glass. The world thought Marcus Thorne was a corporate shark who had died in a scandal. The world was right. That man was gone. The man on the porch was someone else. He was a man who owned nothing but his breath and the dog at his feet. And for the first time, he felt like he actually existed.